Welcome to the Long Story Longer podcast.
I'm Dominic Morano. I prescribe meds.
And I'm Katie Brzezowski, and I provide psychotherapy.
Long Story Longer is a podcast about mental health and navigating medication, therapy, and whatever else we want to talk about.
We will discuss topics from each of our perspectives. We will try to keep it to 15 minutes.
But it will probably be longer. Hello and welcome to the Long Story Longer podcast. My name is Dominic Morano. I am a family and psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. I own my own psychiatric practice and I have a doctorate in the nursing practice. I've been in healthcare for over 20 years and more recently into mental health.
Hey, I'm Katie Brzezowski, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a doctorate in clinical social work, and I own a private practice, and I've been in the mental health profession for over 25 years. So today we are going to talk about a topic that I really enjoy, and that is pop psychology. And essentially, what that means is just these psychological terms or medications or diagnoses that have made their way into the mainstream, right? And doesn't mean that they're wrong or that they're incorrect. It's just that, once things get into the mainstream, they might get a little bit distorted or there might be some misinformation out there. Basically, you've heard people say, oh, I'm so triggered, or, that he's such a narcissist. And that may be true, but we also wanted to kind of deconstruct that and look at what the terms mean.
These are terms that are in the media, on TV, and not necessarily wrong, but they can be oversimplified, overused, or not exactly what someone means when they're trying to describe somebody or something.
Yes, and we see these all the time. We see them every day, both online and in our sessions, with our clients, people bringing diagnoses to us, saying they think they have this or, that they saw this on TikTok. And that's great that so many topics are becoming so much more mainstream, but it's also not so great if we keep getting them all mixed up.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap, as I've said many, many times, in mental health. Some things like, if somebody says, oh my God, someone is so OCD just because they're neat,
Yes.
that doesn't necessarily mean they have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I think you might have mentioned it before, but if someone's saying, oh, I'm experiencing narcissistic abuse, or just putting labels that might not be the best descriptors of things, but since we've heard them and then recognizing the phenomena is happening, just kind of fine tuning what that means in terms of mental health diagnosis and treatment, really.
Yes, because we don't want to oversimplify things and we don't want to be inaccurate. And so it's important for us to kind of at least have an understanding of what it really means and how it really plays out.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is there's been an experience for psychiatric or medication prescribing that lorazepam has come well into fame again as being a treatment for anxiety. And
Thank you to the White Lotus. Great show. But
yeah, and unfortunately, hopefully it doesn't get glorified and made into something. It's a pretty addictive medication that should be reserved for emergencies. Some people are on it consistently because that's all that works for them. But back in the 90s, lithium was like a big thing. Do you remember that?
yes,
Like
yes.
everyone was like, oh, I have to go on lithium for my profound depression and whatever. And was it the best thing for everyone? Maybe at the time, I don't know. But it was also kind of a pretty pop culture thing to happen. But going into some terms, one of my favorites that I think is frequently misused is gaslighting. So gaslighting is a systematic pattern of psychological manipulation. This is reality testing that somebody has because something that someone else has said in terms of patterns is making someone question their own thoughts. This is not just someone forgetting what they said or being defensive in an argument, or I've even seen it used where like gaslighting is referred to as triggering someone. Well, it's not. It's misuse of the descriptor of gaslighting, which we use for various mental health diagnoses, which is, again, patterns of behavior that cause someone to question their own reality. And it's usually used in a narcissistic situation, or it could be, again, a maladaptive way of communicating with someone.
It's strategic. It's designed to make someone, whether they realize it or not, it's designed, if you're gaslighting someone, the purpose is to have them question their reality.
Yeah. And it shows up for emotionally abusive relationships. And again, as I said, personality disorders like a narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder are used. People who have narcissistic tendencies or antisocial personality disorder often use gaslighting as a tactic.
So, another example of something that we hear a lot about lately, and this is something that's we have talked about often, and is actually just part of even our descriptor of our podcast, is ADHD, which you all know now that we both are diagnosed with ADHD. Lots of people think that they have ADHD, and lots of people do have it, but not everybody has it. So now people can be distracted, and a lot of people are distracted. That doesn't mean you have ADHD. So, as we talked about before, if you are seeing things online and it's resonating, then, go further and you can get diagnosed or you can get tested and possibly diagnosed. But it's not everything is actually a clinical issue or a clinical diagnosis. So, we are distracted and we are, task overload. People are so busy. I have to make dinner. I have to do this. I have to pick up the kids. You may forget things. You may put your, keys in the wrong spot, but that doesn't mean that you have ADHD essentially. So ADHD, see tons of TikToks about that, and it's just important to make sure that you actually get diagnosed for that.
Yeah, and the world is busy, right?
Mhm.
It's I think there's such an uptick in sensory overload that it can feel like ADHD, but if you remove the stimulus, is your focus better? And that might be different than a diagnosis for ADHD.
Yeah, is your brain not ever shutting up? Because that's probably
Yeah.
yes.
All right, next example for me is trauma versus distress. People often use the word trauma like if it means there was anything emotionally difficult. But trauma is an overwhelming of the nervous system. These are triggered by things like abuse, violence, or life threatening events. And it can often lead to PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder, which has really specific symptoms in terms of hypervigilance, avoidance, flashbacks. And just from a medication perspective, with PTSD, you can give that help prevent those nightmares at night. People were able to sleep through the night because they weren't having those nightmares that from flashbacks. But again, not everything that you experience that is emotionally difficult is traumatic. It can be emotionally difficult, but trauma can lead to long-lasting effects. I think it's kind of an hyperbole of your emotional difficult experience if you're calling everything trauma.
And there was an article not too long ago out there where a therapist talked about that, how, like, basically not everything is a trauma, and, people came at her because they were like, "Don't you define what's traumatic for me?" And, okay, yes, but also I think there is a definition of trauma, so
Certain diagnoses meet certain criteria,
yeah.
and there's a threshold. So everything cannot be traumatic.
Yes.
Things can be difficult, but everything cannot be traumatic. And again, that does vary from person to person. An example for me, just a really stupid one, was that in the 90s, there was one of the Hilfiger heirs that was having emotional breakdown and really going through it. She was sobbing. She was physically upset because she wanted to make a salad.
What?
Now, it was impairing her ability to function, and she couldn't do it, and so for her, it was a heightened experience that we wouldn't necessarily look at that and think, "Wow," but you have to think an heiress who has not experienced a lot of difficult things in life was having something where these symptoms were violent, they were not these symptoms were extreme,
Mhm.
they were their own experience, so we don't wanna take away from anyone's trauma experience as long as it meets the criteria to define trauma.
Right.
So, unfortunately, the Hilfiger heir was having trauma at the moment, or it was just TV, and that's what it was, but
Right.
she was just going through it. So it's kind of an, hyperbole of a situation
It's a good
based
way.
upon symptoms and how they're manifested, and if they fit into the diagnosis criteria.
So the next one that I wanna talk about is probably, like, the one of the bigger ones that we hear a lot about now on TikTok, and what do you think it is? Narcissism, right? So that word is people can be narcissistic, right? Or they can have narcissistic personality disorder, which is a DSM diagnosis, which is very extreme. It's very severe. And it doesn't mean someone, has a diagnosis of narcissism just because they're self-centered, right? It becomes very weaponized too. Oh, I'm dating a narcissist. Like maybe they're just self-centered and they're kind of a jerk too, but it doesn't mean they have narcissistic personality disorder. That's just a very serious clinical condition that's actually kind of rare. And if someone has true narcissistic personality disorder, that's usually deeply rooted in shame, in early emotional wounds. But if we just looking now online, or people are like, okay, they ghosted me or they put a boundary with me, and that's they're narcissist. Like, it's just getting thrown around a little, and it might not be the best for your relationships or for your own mental health if you are maybe categorizing.
Yeah, and I think you make a point there. If you categorize everyone as narcissistic or not, and it's based on very low criteria of your own recognition, then one, you're not following the DSM, but two, it's also that can be detrimental. Like you said, it can hinder relationships. And is that really narcissistic behavior? Sure. I mean, there can be things, again, there's a spectrum. There can be very low tendencies of people to do various things, but it doesn't make them a narcissist in true nature. And also, there are also behaviors that people can do for a variety of reasons that you can't. It's very easy to go there when you frame a lens already of either people are going to be narcissistic or not.
Exactly. And if people that are victims of narcissistic abuse, I mean, that's an extremely serious situation. And so we don't want to like minimize that in our calling everybody a narcissist, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I can see why people would do that because the brain does not want to be put in a dangerous situation. So if someone has had those experiences before, their lens may be that. It's not necessarily useful for other interpersonal relationships, but it's just a place to go for people at times where is their behavior truly narcissistic, or it's just behavior that's, I don't know, pretty crappy, or it was just a bad thing to do.
Right. And lots of people are bad at communication or emotionally immature, but that doesn't mean that they're all
And
narcissists.
we're not taking away from true diagnosis of narcissism. It's just a matter of you have to fit certain criteria to fit certain descriptors. So again, things come into fad and calling a number of different things what they aren't necessarily. They can kind of be similar, but it doesn't mean that they're exact. I think I'll piggyback off you that another common personality disorder that people often throw out there is borderline personality disorder. And unfortunately, this was just categorized for anyone who's like being dramatic. And I think people are like, oh, they must be borderline, or
Yeah.
oh, they're reacting like some people have emotional reactions to things. That doesn't mean that they have borderline personality disorder. Another thing we've had a long discussion about in our previous
Yeah.
podcast, but categorized by sense of abandonment and then just really persistent behaviors that happen consistently, not just an episode, an isolated behavior that was a rarity. These are consistent behaviors that would deem someone to have borderline personality disorder.
And you can have borderline traits. You can have narcissistic traits. And that's, something clinically to be aware of and that we could treat. That doesn't mean you have the actual diagnosis. You could just have traits.
Yeah. And there are definitive, like gaslighting, for example. If you do true gaslighting, that is a pattern that is recognized for a narcissistic personality.
Mhm.
And like it's a cause and effect sort of thing. You see it happen played out again with just isolated events that aren't a pattern of behavior, may be similar in nature, like I said. But so, yeah. So, other things we wanted to talk about.
Oh, how about we talk about attachment?
Yeah.
So I have had over the last 5 or 10 years definitely an influx of people talking about attachment styles. Talking about secure attachment or anxious attachment or avoidant. They're definitely important topics. There's definitely some evidence behind them, but they aren't as what's the word I'm looking for?
Defining.
Defining, exactly. These aren't like, okay, you have an anxious attachment style, and now that's it. That's what's happening forever. Your relationships are always going to be, characterized by this, your fear and this instability. Like, no, it's kind of like a guide. Let's just use these as a guide, but that doesn't mean like you're set. And just because someone has secure attachment doesn't mean that they're perfect and that they're going to have great relationships and that they've gotten everything right or they had a perfect childhood. It doesn't mean that. So I think for attachment styles, yes, there's truth to them, but it's also, we don't want to rely too heavily on them or use them as like the guide for, okay, I have anxious attachment. That means my future is going to be like this, or I'm avoidant. So, or when people start dating or meet other people, they're avoidant, they're this. Maybe it's important to think about those as you are trying to get to know someone, maybe what their history is, but I don't know that we need to put a ton of weight on it all the time.
Yeah. And something just hit me like lightning right now. Pop culture thing that's happening. Labrador husbands.
What?
Sorry, just kidding. Golden retriever.
No, what is this?
So a golden retriever husband is someone it's an attachment style of sorts. It was popularized by like this book where you would divide yourself into various animals. One was an otter, one was a beaver. But basically, again, recognize attachment styles and how you would work. The caveat to all of these attachment styles is that you're not defined by one. In fact, most of the books say you probably have a blend of a lot of the attachment styles. But I think for pop culture and for people just to put things in boxes and to be able to look at something and categorize it, that a number of these attachment styles or whatever animal you are have come into popularity. So that's just what people are. Everyone's looking for their golden retriever husband or boyfriend or whoever. But yeah, I just think it's kind of it's silly sometimes.
Yes, and they're not fixed personality traits. This is like, so if you're looking for the golden, wait, so that's like somebody who's like really friendly?
Yeah, very friendly, loyal, almost like trainable, if you will. It's kind of like, and again, basically, from the one book that I read, they also, which is not in pop culture, from the one book that I read, they're also very easily hurt. Which people are kind of, they fail to encapsulate all of that, like, because their feelings get hurt real bad. Not that this is like wag their tail, happy, sort of go lucky, trainable sort of individuals, but that they are actually pretty sensitive.
They want the good part of it.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was the next? Do we have any more?
Yeah. So the last part we wanted to talk about was on TikTok and YouTube and whatever your Instagram, whatever your platform is, there are a lot of quick diagnostic tests where like within 20 seconds you can be diagnosed with X. I've had a ton of people come in and be like, hey, just like you were mentioning, I have ADHD. Well, why? Oh, because I took a test. Well, was a test like a
Right.
valid test? Or
Right.
was it just that, oh no, it was a quick, 10-second, 20-second or
That's not going to, if you're really using metrics, like they have to be valid and reliable and they've tested them over, they will do whole research studies just to test measures. Like the whole research study will be testing that measure to see if they're getting the correct information. Okay.
well, I think influencers just get on these buzzwords and these topics where to kind of it's almost manipulative in a way to one to get ratings, but two to kind of dig into someone's personality and say, hey, well, I feel anxious. Well, maybe you have a generalized anxiety disorder.
Mhm.
Well, maybe you don't, and you
Yep.
just have anxiety because that's pretty common.
Actually, we didn't talk about that one, and that we should. Anxiety is a good one.
Anxiety is a good one, and we just talked about political anxiety not too long ago. So political anxiety is a buzzword, but again, we talked about it as a nuanced form of anxiety that the DSM-5 has an anxiety disorders category, but that political anxiety isn't one of them. But it is focused in this environment and what that looks like. We may even have like more data and studies that come out on it. Maybe it will be a diagnosis one day, but it would have to be very themed, almost like a phobia of a specific thing.
Right, right. And I think that, yes, so anxiety just, people are anxious normally over things you're supposed to be, but it's when it's, if you have an generalized anxiety disorder, or if you have panic attacks, like those are cross over into like true impairment and they're, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there could be a little bit of danger with this self-diagnosis, particularly if it's one thing if you are being supervised by a mental health care provider and working through that diagnosis together, sorting it out using various criteria and testing that's evidence-based practice. And otherwise, if you self-assign your own treatment, part of the treatment process is like knowing the side effects, knowing things that could be interactive. There is a risk in terms of medication, there is a risk with just about every medication. My favorite risk that I've heard this is, I mean, it's popular because it's on TV and it's a commercial. I see it all the time. Is that there's this one medication that's out there where you can get an infection in your perineal area. Have you heard it? Like, oh my god.
No.
It's a lie, but that's why it's important. Is like if someone's like, "Hey, go on this medication," it's gonna, and it's for some I don't exactly remember what
It's
disease it is.
nothing related to that. It's just
No, it's like some other disease. Yeah, but it's like, yeah, you can have a perineal infection, and I'm like, well, that sounds horrible. For what? But what if, again, in theory too, what if it was a valid treatment for someone that someone went over that with me and was like, this is really rare that this happens, and you need treatment. That's kind of where TV, media, etc., like, or even me for just focusing in on that negative thing. I don't have all the pieces of it together. I just don't think it was intense. It had a very visceral feeling for me. But
and maybe it's a risk you're willing to take because you want to get the treatment
Yeah.
for whatever the other problem is.
and again, some of these things, like there are some things that are useful. If anything that in this pop psychology is useful as intro to exploring your mental health, great. But don't deem it as like this is what it is. This term, I now know how to use it. And whatever. Just be careful because it can again. There's good and bad with anything, but the bad of this would be that if you're misterming something, or if you're looking through things for tunnel vision, or just flat out using something wrong, it's just not useful in mental health.
Yeah, so let these like pop psychology, let TikTok, let those things be the door, not the diagnosis. So if something resonates with you and you say, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly right," then explore it, but with someone trained, with a professional. And so I think that that's your best, you deserve clarity, you deserve support. So go to someone who can help you make sense of all this stuff that you're hearing.
I feel like you're gaslighting me.
What?
See, that was wrong.
I probably was.
But anyway, that's I think we're kind of wrapping up. Let's just leave it on this, because I think this is important. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Not saying we're available all the time, but we do want to kind of have a Q&A sort of stuff, have an interaction, have emails or whatever sent, comments be made, and see if something that we say doesn't make sense, or you need further exploring, or want to talk about a particular topic. We are more than open to
Yes,
that.
yes.
We'll obviously talk more than the 20 seconds of a TikTok ad, and hopefully we convey things in a manner that's appropriate to how the standards of mental health and how our practices of mental health go.
Yes, and you will see us on TikTok hopefully soon. So, but that doesn't mean that it's not correct on TikTok.
No,
Right.
and I think we're looking more towards like outtakes, or at least the funnier parts of the podcast.
Yes, TikTok will be the funny part, hopefully.
Yeah. So again, I think that we covered just about everything. Remember, some stuff is just for entertainment, and other stuff, just make sure that you're using things right to the best of your ability. So I am Dominic Morano,
And I am Katie Brzezowski.
and this is Long Story Longer. So go out and watch a TikTok, but don't gaslight anyone, or
And have secure attachment.
yeah,
Or
not.
insecure. Okay, yes, that's the best. All right, bye.